Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingerter. Next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz. Dolores can't be with us today. So there's always a lot going on in Israel, and the situation with Gaza. They say Asa. So in Hebrew, it's not Gaza, it's Asa. Sorry for the mispronunciation.
Yep, this is the season for sure. Lots of moving parts in the land of Israel in regards to Gaza. From the moment of the terrorist attack back in October of last year to now, so much has happened. Effectively, Gaza has been subdued, and that's an awesome thing. Of course, the conflict began in Gaza City in the north, and then moved to Khan Yunis, and of course now in Rafah. And Rafah is being again subdued by Israel. And that sounds awfully heavy, but Israel has no choice but to react the way that they're reacting right now. It's as if the world has amnesia, and we're not remembering all of the missiles scudded into Israel, directed to bring harm upon the people of Israel over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
It's as if none of that ever existed.
Ongoing barrage, off and on.
As if there wasn't two intifadas in the last 20 years. Right. The detonation of buses and then, of course, a knife intifada that we looked at over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So there's been intifada after intifada, and it's as if Israel has no right to return hostilities towards these people. And so the situation in Gaza is grave. There's no question about it. But the people of Gaza, I'm talking about the so-called Palestinians, of course we know that they're not Palestinians. They're mostly Egyptians and Jordanians, right?
Right.
So those people have voted their leadership in, and they have maintained them as their leadership, Hamas as their leadership. Hamas is not just active and accepted in Gaza, they're accepted and acted upon in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank. So the situation in Gaza is grave, but it is brought about because of the people's choice of Hamas.
Yeah.
Israel could have easily dealt with Hamas a decade ago, easily. But they held off. They held off because of world opinion. They held off because of the pressure from the UN, from the EU, from the United States. Well, after the last bout with terrorism, October 7th?
Yeah.
Since October 7th, Israel has turned a page. No longer are they considering or placating to the UN or the EU or the United States. They're doing what's necessary to protect themselves, to defend their people. And it's hideous. Again, what's happening in Gaza? Gaza is in peril, but this is a necessary thing. Israel has to do this to defend itself. No nation, either now or in history, would have tolerated anything like this. All those years of intifada, missiles, with evil intent, Israel is reacting because Israel has every right to react. And of course, we know that the nations are in an uproar, which very much points to the prophetic word in the Bible concerning that very thing. So things are coming apart. Hamas is being defeated and crushed in Gaza. I would venture to say that Hamas is being their armies, their divisions are decimated in Gaza, but they're beginning to build strength, and they're beginning to coalesce in Judea and Samaria in the so-called West Bank. Now, they don't have the force in the West Bank that they had in Gaza. Gaza was their lead ship, if I can use that phrase. Gaza was their main thrust. Now that they have been destroyed in Gaza, and I think in the next week or two, it'll be clearly identifiable that Hamas is completely destroyed. You're going to find what's going to be happening in Judea and Samaria, in the so-called West Bank, is you're going to find that there's going to be uprisings. There's going to be maybe 3 or 4 attempts to create another scenario where terrorists will flood communities in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. But they will fail. They will fail because Israel is prepared for it. Israel will not be caught unawares like they did
Right.
in October of last year. They are not going to be caught in that position again. So what's happening, the buildup of tensions, the buildup of hostile intent that we're seeing in Judea and Samaria will be put down by Israel. And that's going to be almost more hideous than what is happening in Gaza. Because the world will take the position that you have no reason to go after these Palestinians in the West Bank. Of course, we've been there.
Right.
Right? And we know what it's like in the West Bank. And I want to talk a little bit about who we are in regards to our work in Israel.
Okay.
I find it necessary for us to talk a little bit about who we are and what we've done in Israel. I think it's necessary for us to talk about what we've done in Israel over the last 10 or 15 years. We are not just people that has come upon the scene with a desire to put emphasis on Israel because of what's happening in Israel. We've been focused on Israel for decades, 5 decades. We've been doing work in Israel. We've been sowing in Israel. We've been ministering in Israel. And it's been an incredible journey for us. We've done work, literal, physical work in Israel. Jim has gone with us many times. I think between Jim and I, we've been to the land of Israel, other than tourists, going as tourists, maybe between us 25 or 30 times.
Sure.
And our work in Israel has always been centered around encouraging the people of Israel to be the people that God has appointed them and called them to be.
Right.
So we're not just, Johnny-come-lately in regards to work in Israel. There are a lot of people that are sort of jumping on the bandwagon and wanting to understand more about Israel. Every day you have leadership groups, pastors that are flooding Israel, and their purpose for going to Israel at this time is to be able to equip themselves to discuss Israel. So we've been not only discussing Israel for all these decades,
Right.
we've been ministering in regards to Israel for 5 decades. So again, we're not just trying to jump onto this Israel bandwagon. We're carrying on something that we've been doing for a long time. This podcast is about 14 years old almost. About.
Yeah.
And we've been doing program after program, which about 60% of those programs would put emphasis on what God's doing with Israel. So,
Yeah.
Jim, you sat through every program with me, and we've been doing this again for almost a decade and a half.
Right.
And the emphasis, you can agree, has been repeatedly Israel. The importance of Israel, prophetically, the importance of Israel today as it relates to who Israel is. And so the point is, we're not just, again, Johnny-come-lately.
Eons ago, the congregation fasted and prayed and got a directive from God to identify with Israel. And we've been walking that out for 50 years.
So our community here have been walking in this way for a long time. We fasted and prayed, and everything we do relative to Israel, we fast and pray about. There's nothing that we do concerning Israel, even if we're going to make a trip to Israel to do work at the project that we work on.
Right.
We fast and pray for it because we want to be sure that God's leading us. So here we are. We're living in a time when Israel is front and center of world events. And we did, in fact, say in a prophetic light that this would happen at a certain point in the future. We've done any number of programs that puts the emphasis on this reality that the time will come when Israel will be lifted up before all the nations. Now, it's very negative, but as we've said on many programs, it will soon become very positive, and Israel will become that shining light among all the nations. And that's a great deal of the emphasis of prophecy that's relevant in the actual Bible concerning Israel, that Israel will become that nation. We in Christianity, we tend to focus on Israel in regards to prophecy as our timeline, our indicator that we're just going to be pulled out of here. So our view of Israel is usually, from what I see, very self-serving, but not serving Israel.
Right.
And therefore not serving God.
Right.
So we
right.
look to Israel in regards to Bible prophecy so that, again, we can get our ticket out of here. And that's incredibly shallow and sad and pathetic that so many people are doing this.
And
again,
easily duped.
I think in the next few months, maybe even the next year, we're going to see a lot of pastors and teachers coming out and discussing Israel, because since, again, like I said, since October of last year, they've been equipping themselves to do this. Too little, too late, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
The issues concerning Israel are deep and broad, and we have to have a broad foundation to stand on in terms of what we understand, what revelation we have in regards to Israel. So let's get back to Gaza. So that's who we are. We're not just trying to capitalize on what's happening in Israel. What's happening in Israel is horrible. We take no joy in people dying, innocent or not. We take no joy in people dying. The death toll is staggering in Gaza. But as I said at the beginning, the people of Gaza, the people that we call Palestinians, which are mostly Egyptians and some Jordanians, most of the Palestinians in the West Bank are Jordanians. Most of the Palestinians in Gaza are actually Egyptians and other North Africans. Anyway, so Gaza is being subdued. The future of Gaza is not clear. Personally, I believe that Israel should have a heavy hand in the governance of Gaza. I think Gaza needs to be controlled by Israel. And then you would say that I have an occupying mentality, and yes, I do. But the deal with this, the deal with the occupation is that you cannot occupy something illegally or illicitly that belongs to you. The land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel. And so they're not occupying anywhere in the land of Israel because the land is theirs. The historic evidence is replete throughout history. The archaeological evidence, the biblical evidence is irrefutable. The land is Israel. The people are Israel. You cannot illicitly occupy something that's yours. The occupiers are the ones who are not indigenous to the land, and those Arabs are not indigenous to the land. The most accurate source of history, the most accurate source of history we have is the actual Bible, the Scripture. And according to what we see in the Bible, clearly the indigenous people of the land are not Arabs. God gave that land to Abraham's descendants. God said to Abraham that your descendants will come into this land when the sin of the Amorite would be complete. Those Arabs are not Amorites. They're not Canaanites.
Right.
They're Arabs.
Right.
Most of them are descendants of Abraham, yes, but not all of them are descendants of Abraham. Many of them are North Africans from different tribes, different connections to Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim is the biblical word for Egypt. Many of them are, in fact, of the family of Moab and Ammon, who are, in fact, related to Abraham, but through Lot. So you see, those people are not indigenous to the land of Israel. They became a part of the land of Israel, as you know, Jim, when the actual indigenous people of the land, the people of Israel, began to return to the land in the 1800s.
Right.
The Jordanians and the Egyptians and the North Africans and the Arabs decided that these natural descendants of Abraham cannot return to the land without resistance. And so these Arab states and the Jordanian state decided that they would resist it.
Right.
By plugging in their rejects, their refugees, their criminals, just push them into that land as an impediment to impede the nation of Israel from becoming the nation of Israel, which they failed. And that began the basis of the conflict in 1948, right? The War of Independence. And then again, so we know the history. So the point is, that land is the land of Israel. The people of Israel, the Jewish nation, are indigenous to that land. History and archaeology and biblical facts all points to that reality. It's hard to get away from that. Now, of course, the world opinion is different than ours.
And suddenly there's a international criminal court, and we haven't met for a little while, so we haven't said anything about that. But it's like, where did that come from? Is it a subunit of the UN?
Absolutely.
It has to be.
Absolutely. So, you know, the enemies of God, I'll say Amalek. And you know, there's an interesting thing happening, Jim, in regards to Amalek. Suddenly, God's enemies are referring to Israel as Amalek.
Yeah. Oxymoron.
Well, we know the truth of that. That's a ploy to try and shift things.
Right.
And transfer onto your enemy who you really are.
Right.
It's a transference of iniquity is what that is. And we've seen that before.
Yeah.
I mean, when someone is committed to sin and a life that's mired in demonic activity, it's very, very typical for them to do a transference of iniquity. That you're that person that I really am. And so I see here, and now this is a new thing, maybe about a month or two old, where a lot of the enemies of Israel are pointing to Israel and saying, you are Amalek. Why did that happen? Why are they saying now that Israel is Amalek?
They can twist it.
Right. Well, from the moment of their assault against the people in the Negev, you know, in October of last year, from that moment going forward, there's been an acknowledgement from people like us, and even from Israelis, that this is Amalek.
Right.
Right? That what happened there was actually Amalek. And that was an acknowledgement made and declared. So the enemies of Israel has decided to counter that. We must spin it completely wrong and refer to Israel as Amalek. Well, the Bible is our source of understanding. It's our arbitration of what is true and what's not true. According to the Bible, Israel can never be Amalek, because God identified Amalek when he came against Israel. And God said concerning Amalek that he will make war with Amalek from generation to generation.
Right.
I'm saying Amalek, but it's Amalek. No, so I say Amalek when I enunciate it. So God said it. He would make war against Amalek throughout all generations. He never declared that he would make war with Israel. What was his final, in regards to prophetic insight, what did God say he will ultimately do with Israel? He would restore them and build them up. He will take them once again to be his wife.
Right.
That's the reality, right? We see that in Hosea. We see it in Isaiah. God said that I have betrothed you unto me, speaking to Israel in righteousness. I mean, but these people that are demonically driven, they are committed to say, well, Israel is Amalek. Again, it's transference of iniquity.
Sure.
So that's happening.
Sure, it's clearly the one that comes up against Israel, that God causes to come up against Israel, that is the Amalek.
How could you not recognize what happened as a move of Amalek? How could you not recognize that Hezbollah in the north, that Iran, even this country that's holding back munitions from Israel, how could you not recognize that Amalek is at large in the world, and it's Amalek in Israel? That's the conflict. It's Amalek in Israel.
Anti-Semitic spirit.
Yeah, anti-Israel.
Right.
We did a program about 3 years ago where we said effectively that anti-Semitism is going to morph into anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism.
Here we are.
And that's what's happened, right? I saw that 3 years ago, and we sat here and we talked about it, and we said, that's coming. And so here we are. Even notable speakers and people that are grounded, or I thought they were grounded, like many people, right? Candace Owen, for instance, and many others. She's not the only one that has turned against Israel. These people, They were not grounded in biblical reality. They superficially supported Israel, but when the rubber got down to the road, what happened? They became incredibly anti-Israel,
Right.
and you cannot be anti-Israel without being anti-Semitic.
Right.
So here we are.
Right.
So let's talk a little more about where things are going now. We're going to get to the question here in a moment. So Israel's war with Gaza, Israel is prevailing mightily. And I think the world is shocked by that. They did everything they could to prevent it from happening, right?
Right.
The United States, the Biden administration wanted to get a hand in there, get a heads up on it, and they built this dock, right? We built this dock outside there of Gaza, and what happened to it? The whole thing has come apart. The entire thing has failed. And the idea was to show that the United States of America are considering the well-being of those Gazans. But even though our efforts to show that and to get involved in it that way has failed dramatically, yet there's an overabundance of food in Gaza. The whole cry that went out about 4 months ago about a famine.
Right.
And all of these organizations, these global organizations, were decrying Israel. You're bringing about a famine in the land. There's a famine in the land. It's a lie. The very organizations that claimed that 5 months ago are now saying it wasn't true. But it's not on the headline news anymore.
Right.
It's not something that you're seeing broadcast anymore, but they've come right out and said it wasn't true. So in terms of the people of Gaza, even though a lot of their infrastructure has been destroyed by Israel, many of their people have died, Hamas has suffered tremendously. I'm talking about all of the groups, all of the military cells have suffered tremendously. And this is a good thing, because those people were absolutely committed to carry out more and more of attacks against Israel.
Right.
They were stating it. So Gaza is going to be subdued. Now, there is the problem of Hezbollah in the north.
Right.
And within the next couple of weeks, we're going to see a strike against Hezbollah. I think certainly within the next month, there's going to be war declared against Hezbollah. It's going to be a different war.
Right.
I think Israel is going to be much more precise with this war because they don't want to affect Lebanon too much.
Okay. I was going to ask, do you think it's Syria and Lebanon that
I think Israel is going to go after
Hezbollah?
Very strategic locations in Lebanon first, because Lebanon is right there on the border with Israel.
Right, right.
Now, the Lebanese people do not want Hezbollah, but the Lebanese people has been drawn into this.
Right.
Hezbollah has invaded Lebanon. Historically, and I'm talking 50 years ago,
Right.
Lebanon was a Christian country.
Yes. Yeah, very few, even 30 years ago. People
30 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before 30 years ago. 30 years ago, yes, but I'm talking 50, 60 years ago is when Iran began to plug, Shiite Islam into Lebanon. But Lebanon was unable to defend themselves, unable to push back on it. So Lebanon for centuries, even 1,500 years or so, has been Christian, Marian Christian. They're called Marian
Right.
Christians.
Right.
They're Roman. They're Catholics, but they're not Roman Catholics. They're closer to being Armenian than Roman.
Okay.
So very ancient Christianity, and they were that way from the early period of the Byzantine Church. So we're talking 1,500 years ago. So it's only in the last 75 years or 60 years that Islam has encroached upon Lebanon. Israel does not want to decimate Lebanon. So, but Israel has no choice but to precisely and very, very clearly deal with Hezbollah. And I think that's what they're going to do. We're going to see much more aerial combat.
Right.
It's going to be ugly, and the nations are going to lose their minds. Turkey, Erdogan, and all of these Arab, surrounding Arab nations are already preparing to invade Israel. Al-Qaeda preparing to march from Afghanistan, and even from Pakistan. Pakistani activists are planning to march against Israel. Literally, march an army across the Euphrates, the dried up Euphrates, and enter into Israel, should Israel attack Hezbollah. I don't think that's going to happen, because the attack against Hezbollah would be so intense, so overwhelming, that it would be quick. Mm-hmm. They're not going to have the time to march across from Afghanistan and from Turkey. They will respond. I think those countries will come together and respond. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we go along. Now, quickly, I want to talk about what's happening in the rest of the world relative to where we are. We know that the Biden administration has been slow rolling its support for Israel.
Right.
On one side of their mouth, they would say, we stand with Israel.
They're still doing that.
They would make the statements such as, our relationship with Israel is ironclad. But what are they actually doing?
Controlling America.
Right.
I mean, controlling Israel. Right.
And applying pressure on Israel so that Israel would acquiesce to their wishes. You're not Israel's friend. It's not as if Israel is fighting a war for profit here. This is an existential battle, war.
Right.
They're fighting for their existence. And so if they were fighting a war for, something other than their existence, I can understand, okay, I'll put a little pressure on them, but they're doing this for their very existence. They're literally, their horizon depends on this war. And yet, our administration would apply that pressure on them. Of course, Bibi Netanyahu gave a speech and rightly accused the administration for holding back weapons. The administration immediately responded and said, we're sending, but they're sending the weapons very, very slowly. All right, they've applied a lot of red tape to the weapons that they would normally send. So they're basically holding back weapons. All right, so that's how this country is now responding to Israel. And why? We know why. Because the United States of America are complicit with the globalists. And the globalists are bent and determined that Israel will not succeed to defend herself. What does that tell us? I mean, let's cut through all of the...
It's anti-God.
Yeah. They're anti-Israel. They're anti-God. Right. They are anti-Semitic. The United Nations has always been anti-Israel.
Yes. Full of legislation from Arab...
Well, yeah, absolutely. It is the United Nations that has empowered the Arab world. I mean, let's be frank and honest. UNRWA, for instance. What happened in Gaza with UNRWA? UNRWA facilitated what happened last October.
Right.
Facilitated it. On October 8th, UNRWA was directly involved in the movement of these hostages around Gaza, directly hands-on involved in it. And so UNRWA, which is a United Nations affiliation, is clearly anti-Semitic. But I'm telling you that the global government, what's referred to in the Bible as the beast, is vehemently and demonically anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. Our administration has begun to march with it. We're on lockstep. We're going right along with it. But we have this outward veneer, this appearance of being a friend to Israel. We're not a friend to Israel. When I say we now, I mean the government.
Right.
The American people
government
will go to war with Israel. That's a fact. The people of this country will defend Israel, not the government.
Right.
What does that tell you about our country?
Going down the tubes.
It also tells us that the government are not representing the people.
Not representing the people.
So that's the basis for a change of government. So hopefully we'll have a change of government. We'll see. So current events. Now let's get to the question here and begin to delve into this. So this question is derived from a discussion I had with someone, and I framed it this way so we can discuss it.
Sure.
So,
Given the current situation with Israel, as it relates to the evil intent of her enemies, what can we expect as we go forward? What does the Bible tell us about where things are headed?
loaded question. We can talk about this
Sure.
for a week. For a week, we can discuss this. All right. So, again, we are not people that are jumping on a bandwagon. We've been walking in this way for multiple decades. You've been walking in this way in regards to Israel, love for Israel, the land and the people, since 1980.
90 for me.
1990, 1989, 1990.
89 and 90.
I've been walking in that since around 1988. I began to come alive concerning Israel even before I was born again. When I became born again, I was then therefore empowered to begin to really understand the Word of God as it relates to Israel and also as it relates to our responsibility towards Israel. So we're talking decades, right?
Yes.
All right. So we're not just doing this because it's popular right now. In fact, real soon it will be unpopular
Right.
among Christians
It's
even.
increasingly becoming unpopular as
Absolutely.
we speak.
And then we'll be doing the same thing we're doing now that we've been doing for decades upon decades. So let's talk about this. Just a broad discussion centered around the question, what can we expect going forward? So, Bible prophecy, when Jesus gave his discourse on the Mount of Olives, it really was a message, but it's called the Olivet Discourse. What's the difference between a discourse and a message?
I have no idea.
So the Olivet Discourse, is, as it's referred to, when he gave that message, it was revolutionary. It was unlike anything that has ever been heard before. In Judaism, they try to compare Jesus to some of the teachers at the time. Like they look at Hillel and some of the other
Right.
great teachers at that time, and they try to compare his message with theirs to sort of make the point that he was just on that particular vein of teaching, right? But none of them can do anything with the Olivet Discourse because the Olivet Discourse is unique. It presents Bible prophecy, prophetic insight, eschatology at that time on a level that never existed.
Right.
Surely Isaiah and Ezekiel and Zechariah, they spoke concerning Bible prophecy, but nothing like what Jesus presented. What Jesus presented was concise, was to the point, was identifying so clearly what the future of mankind would be like, and that was powerful. Now, what has the devil been doing with that since he gave the discourse? The devil's been trying to corrupt that message and add factors to it that will take away from it.
Right.
And when you look at current Bible prophecy teaching, you come to the conclusion that the devil has succeeded. The Olivet Discourse, Matthew chapter 24 and 25, can be taken by itself. You don't have to avoid it because it paints the picture that we will be here during the tribulation. Many do. Many Bible teachers avoid the Olivet Discourse because it gives a clear and concise picture that the elect, his disciples, will be here during the tribulation, and when he comes to reign in the earth, then he will gather the elect. So the people that are married, committed to the pre-tribulation rapture concept, they avoid it. They cherry pick from the Olivet Discourse.
Sure.
But what they end up doing is they do a lot of cherry picking to support their prophetical, their eschatological theory. And again, like I've said many times, a lot of Bible prophecy that we see being propagated on the internet and on TV, does TV even exist anymore? Does anyone?
It does.
It does, yeah. So a lot of the Bible prophecy that we're picking up and has been picking up for a long time is based on this pre-tribulation rapture concept. We've done several programs exposing
Right.
where that came from and the evil root of it.
And that it's an end time delusion.
It's a delusion, sure. And the source of it is Jesuit. It was introduced by Jesuit priests and scholars. So a lot of Bible prophecy people tend to ignore that or look past it.
Oh, yeah.
So the actual truth is, to arrive at that pre-tribulation rapture, the whole contraption, I call it, you have to do a lot of piecing and cherry picking.
Yeah.
And put together a concept that's not actually in line with the Olivet Discourse, even with the book of Revelation. So, what has happened? Well, certain people, the Moody Bible, Moody Bible is that Bible that grabbed the whole of that pre-tribulation rapture concept and began to propagate it. Before that, you had in Europe many Bible teachers and so on that were propagating this new idea of a pre-tribulation rapture. It initially got its start with the Scottish Presbyterians. A young Scottish maiden by the name of Margaret MacDonald.
I took your class.
This
is familiar sounding.
So this is for our audience. Young, I think she was 14 years old. She was prone to fits. She had epilepsy or something. And whenever she would prophesy, she would go into a state of being overcome by fits. And she was prophesying, and she began to prophesy concerning a book that she read that had been translated from Spanish into English. And the name of the book in English is The Coming of Messiah with Majesty and Glory. I'm not sure what you would call that in Spanish. How would it translate in Spanish? But it was written by a Jesuit. Not Peruvian. He was actually Chilean who had moved to Peru, Lima, Peru. And he wrote this book in Lima, Peru. His name was Emmanuel de la Cunza Diaz. Emmanuel de la Cunza Diaz was a Jesuit. Introduced this concept of a secret coming of Christ when he would appear secretly and take away the best of the believers, the most committed of the believers. And he'll take them away 45 days before he returns.
45 days.
This was his idea. Now, he wrote that book, and then he was a Jesuit. The Jesuits were banned from South America. He went to Italy, where he was nullified. He was killed. Literally on the streets of Genoa, he was ran through by an ice pick, which was done by the Jesuits quite a bit at that time.
Was there a method of...
Very effective, very silent. So he was found dead on the streets of Genoa, but his book was translated into English. And then this young Scottish Presbyterian, Margaret MacDougall, I think you say, MacDougall, she got a hold of the book and she absorbed it. She drank it. And she firmly accepted the idea of a secret coming of Christ when he would come and take away the Scottish Presbyterians, the best of the believers, the true believers. And why did the Scottish Presbyterians see themselves as the true believers? Because the baptism of the Holy Spirit had occurred with them in Glasgow. So she had this incredible idea, and she prophesied that idea, and it was embraced by her brothers. They were called the clan of the MacDonalds.
Sure.
And they were influential. And so this is in the early 1800s. So that brings us up now to mid-1800s. You had Bible prophecy teachers and scholars, not scholars, but authors writing about that whole concept. People like Ironside and Darby and others that were writing on this. And so when the Pentecostal movement happened, the Plymouth Brotherhood, the Dallas Seminary, what do you call those
Dallas
guys?
Theological Seminary.
They decided that they're going to run with that theory on the coming of Christ, the pre-tribulation coming. So what if it was written by a Jesuit? So what if it was advanced by a young lady who had fits? We're going to run with it. And they ran with it. Ended up in the Moody Bible. And then throughout that period following that, up to the 1960s, it was being taught. But it was never mainstream. It was never accepted until one author by the name of Hal Lindsey wrote that book, The Late Great Planet Earth, which was fictional.
Right. Yeah, when you go in the Christian bookstore, you have to go to the fiction section to
It was a fictional piece.
buy it.
And suddenly, everyone bought into it. It became Bible. And today, even today, I heard in the last 5 days, I've heard no less than 3 Bible prophecy people continuing to promote that whole concept. Well, it's based on a lie.
Yeah.
It's based on a fictional piece that was based on what a Jesuit advanced in his book. Unfortunate. The truth is, the Olivet Discourse gives us everything we need to know about the coming of Messiah, his kingdom to be established, and when we're going to be caught up to be with him, the elect. Tells us when, at the end of the tribulation period. We've dealt with this too many times to go back and read the verses. I would admonish our listeners to go read Matthew chapter 24 and 25 and read it in context of the actual text, and you will be shocked. Now, concerning what's happening today and what we're seeing in the world today, it's very much related to Psalm 2, the second Psalm, and Psalm 83. Very much associated with that. It points to a time when directly surrounding nations will rise up against Israel. So in Psalm 2, let's go look at the second Psalm. I think we know this Psalm very well. But this Psalm is pointing exactly to where we are today and what's in the immediate future. So I'm just going to read a little bit, Jim, and then
Sure.
we'll pop over to 83. Maybe you can read some in 83 for us.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, I'll read in Psalm 2. You can read in Psalm 83. Maybe, let's see, 83, 1 to 12. How's that?
Okay.
1 to 12 will cover what we want to talk about. So what we want to illustrate here is that based on actual Bible prophecy, which is found in the Bible, in Psalm 2 and Psalm 83, the psalmist, in the case with Psalm 2, it's David. In the case with Psalm 83, it's not. But the psalmist pointed to a time when what we're seeing today would become a reality. And this is our reality today. Why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand. The rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their feathers apart and cast away their cords from us. It's talking about the exact situation today. The anointed of God is the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel. The nation of Israel is God's anointed. We would also say those in Messiah that are truly grounded in his word are also that people. So when you look at this, the nations of the world that are definitely taking counsel together, that are conspiring against God's anointed, have 2 bodies of people in the earth that they have real grievances with. And that is Israel, those who will stand in faith and be Israel, and believers in Messiah who will do the same, stand in faith and be the believers of Messiah. Those are the 2 people that they have issues with. Verse 4, he who sits in the heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. So this is pointing to a time when it will be recognizable by the nations that there is a king in Israel, or one soon to be placed in Israel. I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Clearly it's referring to Messiah.
Right.
And those in Messiah, right?
Yes.
Clearly. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Now, I just love verse 8. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance. Now, the very entity or entities that are working against God's anointed will be given to this anointed one as his inheritance. So God's going to subdue the nations, and that's what it's reflecting. God is going to subdue the nations, and he will do it through Israel, and he'll do it through his anointed ones. Now therefore, kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence, and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all those who take refuge in him. The psalm is dealing with where we are today. This psalm has never been more applicable to human existence than it is right at this very moment. The nations, there's never been a condition under which all of the nations would be able to consolidate and counsel with each other,
Right.
and take advantage over God's people. There's never been such a condition, but here we have it, and we're seeing it.
Right.
Now, added to this is Psalm 83, so you can read those verses for us.
What verses am I doing?
Do 83, 1 to 12.
Sure. O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent, and, O God, do not be still. For behold, thine enemies make an uproar, and those who hate thee have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against thy people, and conspire together against thy treasured ones. They have said, Come, and let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one mind against thee. They make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrigites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them. They have become a help to the children of Lot.
Pause there for a moment.
Sure.
Many, if not all, every one of the peoples that are mentioned there from verse 6 to verse 8
Right.
are exactly the people that are conflicting with Israel today. Exactly the people that are being used as the instrument against Israel.
Right.
Who are behind these Arab nations? They're not Arabs. They're not all Arabs. Ammon is there. Ammon is not.
Right.
It's Jordan.
Right.
Ammon is not Arab. Amalek is not Arab. Philistia, not Arab. Tyre, not Arab.
Right.
They're Armenians, not Armenians, are Arameans. So, but then it mentions the Ishmaelites. Of course, they're Arabs. Ishmaelites are basically the Arabs. The sons of Ishmael, 12 sons,
Right.
they became the Arab nations. So you see, it's not just the Arabs that are conspiring. It's a consortment of nations. But I'm saying that these nations that are mentioned here are at the front of the assault. Who's behind it? Well, Amalek. Amalek on a much broader scale.
Right.
Amalek, the spiritual entity that's working against the people of Israel, working against God. So finish up those verses there if you would, please.
Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera at Jabin, at the torrent of Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who became as dung for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, Let us purpose for ourselves the pastures of God.
Meaning they're the land of Israel. So the psalmist here, who's Asaph, mentions some great victories that Israel has had over some of their ancient enemies, and he is basically pleading with God that this conspiracy against Israel will come under the same ending, will come to the same conclusion as it did with those enemies of God. So when you put the verses that you just read together with Psalm 2, it creates a consolidated picture. Not a complete picture, but a pretty tightly consolidated picture of where we are today. And it's being unfolded right before us. God is unpacking this mess right before us. The nations are conspiring against Israel. 20 years ago, if I had said something like that, I would have been a conspiracy, conspiracist. But the Bible speaks of this conspiracy, and we're seeing it being played out right now. It's an amazing thing. In regards to Hamas, though, and Hezbollah, and all of these entities that will come against Israel, they're all Hamas in regards to what the word Hamas means. They're all violence.
Right.
They're all coming against Israel with violent intent. So I love what Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 60, if you can read that for us, Jim.
Sure.
15 to 18. Now Isaiah 60 is the time when Israel is restored.
Yeah.
Right? So during that period, here is what God will do with Hamas, violence.
Right. Whereas you have been forsaken and hated, with no one passing through, I will make you an everlasting pride, a joy from generation to generation. You will also suck the milk of nations, and will suck the breast of kings. Then you will know that I, the Lord, am your Savior and your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Instead of bronze, I will bring gold. Instead of iron, I will bring silver. Instead of wood, bronze. And instead of stones, iron. And I will make peace your administrators, and righteousness your overseers. Violence will not be heard again in your land.
Hamas will not be heard again in your land.
Nor devastation or destruction within your borders.
So I just love that incredibly precise prophecy by Isaiah. And just to give it a quick synopsis, God's going to bring Israel to a place where her enemies will be subdued before her, and her enemies will pay homage to her, will bring tribute to her.
Right.
And there will be no more Hamas, no more violence. So it's pointing back to Psalm 83. When all these nations will arise, Psalm 2, let us tear them apart. It's pointing back to this incredible push among the nations to bring Israel to an end. It is, in fact, the very essence of Amalek, right?
Right.
That's moving in the nations that are desiring to destroy Israel. That's the essence of Amalek. So we know the story of Amalek, right? It's found where? In Exodus chapter 17.
Right.
Very vivid. Israel was about to get to Horeb and Mount Sinai, and there God will make a covenant with them. Well, the evil one, Hasatan, the devil himself, understood what was about to happen, and he raised up this people, the people of Molech, Amalek, and he brought them against Israel. So their very creation was done. Their very creation exists on that foundation that their purpose is to resist Israel and to prevent Israel from becoming the nation that God intends them to be. So that's the purpose of Amalek. Israel can never be Amalek. Amalek is that entity that's working against Israel.
Right.
So we live in a time when Amalek has become large, as large as it can possibly become. During the time of Esther, during the period of the Persian Empire, Amalek was represented in Haman, right? He was a representation of Amalek. And he was by no means, a multitude a majority in Persia, but he was large enough and powerful enough and influential enough to bring Israel to a point of destruction. Of course, God intervened through Esther. But here we are today, where Amalek is everywhere. Amalek is reflecting in our colleges.
Yeah.
Amalek is being presented in our schools, in our places of higher learning. Amalek is actually rooting itself in all fabric of our society. Amalek has been consistently invading this country from the south, for the past 5 or 6 years. I mean, right now, only now are we beginning to deal with the fact that ISIS has invaded this country from our southern border. It's on the news today, but this has been happening for 5 years.
Right,
And
at least.
And people like us have been declaring this, but of course, to no avail. Our voices are so small, but nevertheless, we've been saying this,
Yeah.
that Amalek is invading this country and preparing to do what? To bring to this country and our communities what has happened in Israel. Because the goal is that Amalek will encompass the entire world. And ultimately, once they do, the focus will be God's anointed, who is Israel, and those who are in his word, those who are in Messiah. So Amalek is arising, right? So Amalek is taking his place in the earth. What's the end of Amalek? The prophet Balaam in Numbers chapter 24 stated exactly what the end of Amalek would be. The prophet Balaam talked about a time when Israel will be the chief of all the nations. And that Israel, there will be a star, a chochab, a prince, right? That's what the word chochab means. A star, not a literal star. It's not talking about the Star of David. Balaam said a chochab, a prince, a ruler will arise in Israel. And then Israel will become this nation. And then shortly after that he says, and Amalek will be destroyed. The end of Amalek is destruction. So once this chochab, this prince, takes his place in Israel, Amalek is about to be destroyed. So God is going to destroy Amalek. There's no question about it. Amalek actually goes out of existence, at least for 1,000 years.
Right.
At the end of that, we see another showing of Amalek, which is Gog and Magog. But this Amalek that's rising in the earth, that's being reared up in the earth today is Armageddon. All right? So the tool of Amalek is Armageddon, this global conflict that's being framed right now. But we know the end of that. And what is the end of that? Well, this star, this chochab, will come, and he will put an end to Amalek, and he'll establish his kingdom in the earth, the Father's kingdom in the earth. And righteousness and justice will be the foundation of his throne. We know it. Now, there are many Bible prophecy people that are looking for the Antichrist. Right? That's without the showing of the Antichrist, there cannot be a rapture.
You've been using that terminology since the 4th century.
So without the showing of the Antichrist, there can be no rapture. So they need the Antichrist to show up in order to get their ticket punched and go to heaven. So there's a desperation almost among many of these Bible prophecy people to see the third temple, the Antichrist temple, built, and to have the appearance of the Antichrist so that we will know that we're in the period of the Great Tribulation, as if we haven't had tribulation for over 100 years. I mean, what was World War I and the Spanish flu and everything that followed, where millions and millions of people perished, multiple millions? What about World War II?
Right.
All that happened. What about what
Korea,
happened in China?
Vietnam.
In
Right.
China. That was tribulation. So what about the slaughter of near 2 billion babies since the 1800s, since abortion became an industry?
Right.
That's tribulation. We've been in tribulation. You want more tribulation? It's coming.
Yeah.
There is greater tribulation coming, but that greater tribulation is coming at the hands of God. God's going to bring about the end of this period, and he's going to strike the earth. He's going to do it. And that's the great tribulation that's ahead of us. But we're in that tribulation period now. So there are many people that are just waiting to have their ticket punched so that they can get out of here, escape the great tribulation, despite what the Bible says about that. And they're looking for Antichrist, the Antichrist, a person. Does the Bible support that, really?
No.
The Bible talks about a beast, which clearly, from what we see in Daniel 7, Revelation chapter 11, 13, all the way to 20, the beast is a government.
Right.
Not a person. Someone might say, well, it's got to be ran by a person, but show me that. Show me where it says concerning eschatology that there will be one person running this end-time Antichrist government. It's not there. Oh, but 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, right?
Doesn't speak of an antichrist.
What was Paul? No, Paul never used the word antichrist.
No, right.
The word antichrist is never used in the Olivet Discourse. He said many false Christs and many false prophets. He never pointed to a antichrist.
Right.
John didn't. Book of Revelation, Jesus' revelation given to him by God, which he shared with us, John, doesn't point to a person. It points to governmental systems. Every horn that's on the head of the beast is a kingdom.
Right.
Being ruled by a king. Yes, there's always a person that's leading a governmental system. But the beast is not a person. The beast is a government.
Right.
Clearly. The angel said that to Daniel. Daniel saw this fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7 in his night visions, and he was perplexed.
And horrified.
Horrified. It actually tormented him for the rest of his life. In Daniel chapter 12, he was still querying about the fourth beast. All right. The fourth beast clearly is identified in Daniel chapter 7 as a kingdom.
Right.
A fourth kingdom that will come upon the earth. There are three kingdoms that came behind it. We're not going to get into what kingdoms they were, but basically they were the Roman Empire,
right,
the Grecian Empire,
right,
and the Persian Empire.
Right.
Those were the three empires before, the three kingdoms before, and this is in Daniel chapter 7. Okay, so the angel said to Daniel, here are four kingdoms that will come upon the earth. When Daniel was told that by the angel, the Babylonian kingdom was already dissipating.
Right.
So the Babylonian kingdom was not
right.
one of them.
Right, right.
The next kingdom to come, the fourth to come upon the earth, was the Medo-Persian, the Grecian, the Romans, and then this fourth beast. So the Roman Empire merged into the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Empire reigned supreme in the earth until the 1500s, roughly. After the Council of Trent, they conceded to the fact that they were losing ground. The Holy Roman Empire. And then came the Protestant movement. So the third beast actually came to an end somewhere in the late 1500s. Lost its power.
So they went after Martin Luther to burn him at the stake, and the German army interceded on Luther's behalf and fought off the Swiss Guard, representative of the Vatican.
The Vatican, Holy See,
So it was the first time that they'd lost a battle in Europe in 400 or 500 years.
Rome has always had problems with the Germanic people from time immemorial, right? So, but you see, the third beast is Rome, but then the fourth beast. Daniel saw that fourth beast, and he couldn't even compare it to anything he has ever seen in nature. The three beasts before it, you had the lion that grew wings and became a man. You had the bear with awesome claws and teeth.
Right.
You had the leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. That was Rome. But then you have this fourth beast, unrecognizable. And he queried it. And the angel said to him, the fourth beast is the fourth kingdom that will come upon the earth. It will be awesome. It will subdue and crush the entire world. That's the beast of Revelation chapter 11 to 20. What's the end of the beast in Revelation 20?
Lake of fire.
Lake of fire. This governmental system and the false prophet that will come alongside it are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. But the false prophet is a religious government. The beast is a geopolitical government that's already has already taken its place in the earth. The beast is that entity that's representing Amalek today. The beast is sort of the epitome of Amalek. And that beast is going to be subdued by Jesus. Jesus is going to put down. So the beast is not a man. The beast is a government, representative of many nations. So where does this idea of a Antichrist come from? It comes from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 1 to 12, which we're not going to read all of it. But we're going to cherry pick from it. Since everyone else cherry picks, we're going to cherry pick from it. So in 2 Thessalonians, let me read a little bit, Jim.
Sure.
If I can put my hand on here real quickly. Now, so the only person that drew reference to a possible individual Antichrist was Paul. But who was he speaking to or speaking of? He was speaking to the people at Thessalonica.
Yeah.
Who had come to the conclusion that Christ had come.
They'd missed it.
They missed the rapture. By the way, we know that there will be a rapture.
Yeah.
The timing of the rapture is what's important.
Right.
So Paul is trying to comfort these believers. It's his second letter to that church. And he mentions to them that there will not be the coming of Christ until or after an apostasy comes. What's an apostasy? A falling away.
Right.
A state of a people or religious movement that has fallen away. So we know that apostasies existed before the apostasy in the church, and this, he's pointing to something that will occur in the church. Now, Paul had a real issue with the church at Rome. What was the issue he had with the church at Rome?
They were divided.
They were horribly divided.
Right.
But the biggest issue he had was at Rome, they were propagating the idea that you don't need law.
Mm.
That was the problem. Antinomianism, as it's referred to, began to foster in Rome. That church at Rome. Why? Because the Romans were saying we don't need Jewish law.
And their society was pretty lawless to begin with.
Lawless, one, but two, they were Pax Romana. They were the capital of the world, right?
Right, right.
So they were saying, wait a minute, we love Jesus, we love who you are, people of Israel, but we're not going to abide by your law because we're Romans. And that was the nature of the conflict. You study the book of Romans carefully from that perspective, you see it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Paul had a lot to say to the Jewish believers who were lifting themselves up above everyone else.
Right.
He had a lot to say to the Gentile believers who were exalting themselves above Israel. So he went through this whole process of combating, affronting this apostasy that began at Rome, and that's the point. When Paul spoke to the church at Thessalonica, he said the apostasy has already begun.
Right. And that was...
And the apostasy is lawlessness.
Right.
You see.
Right.
He's going to point to the lawless one who will arise and change the laws and the time, the Sabbaths, the festivals. He will change them. He is the lawless one. Now, Jesus, in Matthew chapter 7, on the Sermon on the Mount, in the Sermon on the Mount, he addressed lawlessness.
Right.
He said, when he comes, many will say to him, Lord, 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 and then we prophesy, then we do all these things, and he's going to declare to them, depart from me, you're an apostate movement. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.
Right.
Literally, antinomianism. You've rejected the law. Which law? Which law do you think he was talking about? Lawlessness? Is he saying that they were in the streets rioting and pilfering and looting? Is that the lawlessness that he was talking about in Matthew chapter 7? What lawlessness do you think he was talking about? Anti-Torah.
Right.
They were anti-Torah. Lawlessness, from Jesus' point of view, is rejection of Torah. The Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5 and 6, is about Torah. We need to appraise that honestly. Chapter 5 and chapter 6 of Matthew is about Torah. Jesus gave a commentary on Torah, how you approach Torah. Read it again, and you will see it for our listeners. Read it again.
Sure.
Now, at the end of that sermon, he talked about lawlessness. And then he ends the sermon by saying, if anyone hears these words of mine. So again, he was talking about lawlessness and a church that will become lawless in the future. He saw it. And then he says, if anyone hears these words of mine and does them, they will be like a wise man who builds his house on a rock. And the wind comes and the rain comes and the house stands. And then he says, if anyone hears these words of mine and does not do them, they will be likened unto a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The wind and rain comes and it's washed away. He ends the message.
Right.
It's as if at the end of 7, he began to see prophetically in the anointing that there will come a church that is supposed to be a part of his movement that will embrace lawlessness. And he will tell them on that day, I never knew you.
Right. Right.
And then he gets to the core of the reason, because you didn't obey him.
Right.
You didn't take my words. You didn't build your house on the rock. The rock is the Word of God. The rock, the Word of God, is synonymous. It is indelibly connected to the law, Torah.
Right.
Here, Paul is recognizing that there will come one who will initiate lawlessness. Who is he talking about? He began to see in the church at Rome lawlessness beginning. What
Right.
happened to the church at Rome?
Right.
When your ancestors, the Germans, began to conflict it,
Right.
began to resist and take, the Visigoths, right? Your people, the Visigoths came in and they sacked Rome. They went to Nicaea.
Yes.
The church at Rome went to Nicaea.
Basically Constantinople.
Right. The same church that Paul had a problem with that were antinomian, they migrated to Nicaea, and then we had the
Council of Nicaea.
At the Council of Nicaea, Constantine,
Right.
a Roman god, let's not call him an emperor,
Right.
because he was worshipped as a god. He believed himself to be Apollos, who was Zeus. In the Greek pantheon, Apollos was Zeus. Constantine, to his very dying bed, saw himself as a manifestation of Apollos.
Right.
He was a god. He was worshipped as such. Sacrifices and libations were offered up to him. So this Roman god, this Apollos, took his place over the church. He was the lawless one. And what happened as a result of the Council of Nicaea? The laws and the times would change.
Right.
So you would say, wait a minute. But he's been dead for 1,700 years. Yeah, but he's been alive in your Christianity.
Right.
He's been alive in Orthodox Christianity for that period of time. Jesus is going to slay him when he comes.
I went to the cathedral in Rome, St. Paul's Cathedral in Rome. And when you go in, there's a great foyer. And if you go straight in, you go into the cathedral. But if you go off to the right, there's a great big room off to the right.
Right.
You can look through the windows. It's great big, huge stone statue of Constantine on a horse.
Yeah. Well, in Constantinople, actually, he built what's called the Ark of Constantine. And that's where, if you approached Nicaea from a certain angle, like if you're coming into Nicaea from its main entrance, you would see the Ark of Constantine's arch, I think. And the way it was set up in ancient times was behind it, there was a huge brass statue of Apollos with Constantine's face on it. So literally, as you approach Nicaea, you would see Apollo standing on the arch of Constantine. And that's the visual that you will get.
Right.
And the statement was, I am Apollos. He never repented from that paganism.
No.
He died as a pagan. They announced him to be a Christian after he died, but he was never a Christian.
Right.
His mother was perhaps a Christian, and he ousted her. He
Right.
pushed her out of his kingdom.
He was merciful. He didn't execute her.
Exactly. So Constantine becomes known as the savior of Christianity. But what Christianity? Orthodoxy, the orthodoxy that had embraced lawlessness.
Right.
Without going too far afield into this, that church became known as the Byzantine Church. The Byzantine Church marched into Israel, what was then the Golan Heights, the Galilee area, even into Judea, and annihilated the Nazarene Church that was in fact keeping the Torah and standing with Israel.
Right.
Annihilated them, pushed them into the wilderness. You want to talk about an apostasy?
Right.
You want to talk about a lawless one? Sure, Constantine will fit into Antichrist. But according to John, who introduced the term Antichrist, Antichrists are those in the church, who were in the church but were not a part of the church.
Right.
They came away from it because they denied the sonship of Jesus. They denied who he was. They denied the anointing, and they denied the sonship of Jesus. They were antichrists. That's Antichrist. He never said that there would be a singular Antichrist.
This exists in churches today.
Precisely.
Right.
It exists everywhere.
Right.
So Antichrist is at large in the earth. But we shouldn't be looking for a individual. That's deception. It's tied into this whole pre-tribulation rapture contraption that deceives people. In other words, there are millions of Western Christians that are looking for the Antichrist figure as an indicator that we're going to get our tickets punched. Millions upon millions, and that's being propagated again because of the situation in Israel. It's a shame. The Antichrist doesn't exist. The beast government does exist.
Yeah.
And it's at large. And it's doing its exploits. It's having its 15 minutes of fame. It's right before us, and we don't even know it. It's right before us. Many liberal Christians support it. Many liberal Christians are advocating it. The very beast. Strictly speaking,
Sure.
They're set to take the mark of the beast. They don't even know it. That's where we are. It's an awesome time. So what's coming for Israel? Glory. To answer that question, God's glory will come to Israel. And if I can figure out what camera is pointed right at me, God's glory is the future of Israel. That's the reality of what the Bible actually tells us. His glory will inhabit Jerusalem. And when it does, Israel will be that nation that God has called Israel to be. This is the future of Israel. So you see Israel today, she's in a battle, no doubt. There is a great struggle ahead of Israel. It's not the time of Jacob's trouble. The time of Jacob's trouble was roughly 7 years of Nazi terror. We're living in the time of Jacob's glory, and that glory will only become brighter and brighter. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 1 to 3, arise and shine, for your light has come. Darkness encompasses Amalek, encompasses the nations, but your light has come. Kings will come to your shining. That reference is strictly relegated to the people of Israel. That's where we are, and that's the future of Israel. Israel will prevail in every conflict. Why? Because God is with Israel. This is the period of time that the prophets all spoke of, when God will favor Israel above all the nations. In fact, he's using Israel to bring all the nations into this final conflict. Who do you think will prevail? Israel. I want to be here for it. I don't want to be raptured out. I want to be here for it, because I want to be a vessel of that. And you should be as well. Each believer in Messiah should now at this time be firmly grounded in his word, unlike any other time, and plant yourself in his word and be that vessel that will, with Messiah, usher in this period. Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith in the earth? Or are we all going to be raptured out to a cloud somewhere in heaven? Will he find faith in the earth? The answer is yes, he will. And hopefully the numbers will be vast. So my encouragement is that you will actually embrace the Bible. Forget auxiliary books. Books that people have written to score for themselves a name, to make money. Put those books aside. Embrace the reality of God's word. Stand on it. Let it be your final arbitration of what is true and what is not true. And you will learn the truth. The truth will set you free.
That's our program. If this question has raised other questions in your thinking, you are at liberty to share them with us. The easiest way to do that is to email us at voice@buildupzion.org. Again, that's voice@buildupzion.org. And until next week, shalom.